to Season 3 of In the Lead with UCEA. I'm your host, Mónica Byrne-Jiménez, Executive Director of the University Council for Educational Administration. In this podcast, UCEA presents pivotal conversations with people making an impact on educational leadership preparation, practice, and policy. Learn about the latest happenings and cutting-edge research from UCEA's community of scholars. This season, we are diving into how the Wallace Foundation helps communities build more vibrant and just futures through research in the arts, educational leadership, and youth development. In particular, we'll be talking with the foundation executives and authors of recent reports on educational leadership. In today's episode, we hear from Bronwyn Bevan, Vice President for Research at the Wallace Foundation. At the Foundation, Dr. Bevan contributes to the development of the Foundation's learning strategies and commissions research that builds the evidence base in the Foundation's focus areas of educational leadership, the arts, and learning and enrichment. How has the Wallace Foundation contributed to the knowledge base in education? What has been the impact of their research on schools and communities? Listen here to find out. Welcome, Bronwyn, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Monica. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely, and I love that that skyline there.
Yeah, I've got the Statue of Liberty right here,
right over your shoulder.
Not me. Yeah.
These are the days that makes me miss New York. But let's talk about the research initiatives at the Wallace Foundation. And I know you have a broad range of research interests in terms of your missions to build strong communities. So could you tell us a little bit more about those and where they are?
Sure. As you mentioned in the introduction, we fund in three areas: education leadership, youth development, which is sometimes called learning and enrichment, but it's youth development, and also the arts. And in each of those areas, we have informally we're not wearing it on our T-shirts, but what we call a North Star in each area, which kind of guides the big picture, the long term. We've been working in these areas for quite a long time, all three of them. In the education leadership, the North Star, for example, is a highly qualified leader for every high needs school. Mm-hmm. That guides our thinking about what kind of funding we do, both in working with school districts and also working with researchers. In youth development, the North Star is high quality after school programs and after school and summer programs for all young people. Mm-hmm. And in the arts, it's a vibrant and equitable arts ecosystem. So those are first of all kind of our big picture in terms of how we work. And then that guides us to design initiatives. I can talk about that a little bit more, but for example, in education leadership, the initiative, our current large-scale initiative, which is multi-year funding for with a number of different districts, is focused on how to develop principal pipelines or systems of support to support equity-centered leaders. So while the North Star is highly qualified leader in every school, the specifics becomes, let's focus on equity-centered leaders right now. And I can give similar examples in the arts. The broad North Star is a vibrant and equitable arts ecosystem. And our work right now over a 5-year period is focused on working with arts organizations that were founded by and for and with communities of color to really understand the role that they play in supporting an equitable and vibrant ecosystem.
And then that's fascinating in the idea that one of the things I appreciate in knowing and learning more about the Wallace Foundation is sort of the interrelatedness of those three things, and how that relationship is actually becoming more important. As probably since the shutdown of schools and people coming back to sort of reimagine themselves. So maybe can you talk a little bit about your thinking about how those three are interconnected?
Well, it's a good question. We actually talk about that quite a lot. In fact, the arts programming has it's sort of two parts to it. And one is public arts, sort of public nonprofit facing arts, and the other is youth arts programs. And so that is sort of an area that spans both our youth development efforts to think about equitable systems or high quality after school programs, but also how the arts plays a specific role or can play a specific role in that work. We also know that as we've done a lot of work in the space of summer and district-based after-school programs as well, and the school leaders are essential in that role for committing to summer as a time that where of learning and enrichment, so meaning academics but also non-academics should be available to all. So it sort of operates differently in different contexts and times, but we all work in what we call an interdisciplinary way in kind of all decision making here that spans programmatic, research, and communications efforts, but also at a decision making level across these different areas.
Mm. And how has your own sort of, professional background, I think, helped you make those connections for the foundation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think two things. I came in knowing, having worked in the out of school time informal learning space, so I
Mm.
knew that field well. Um, I at the Exploratorium, science and art are deeply interconnected, so I had a lot of familiarity with arts research, particularly youth arts research. Education leadership was actually a big learning curve for me, which over the last 5 years, I've been here for 5 years, done a lot of reading and learned a lot. And that's actually been one of the great things about being here is the amount of learning that can go on. I think in my role, although all of our work is done collaboratively, of course, we all bring our own sort of experience and expertise to the conversation. I think we're really trying to think differently about what kinds of research approaches are most suited for the kinds of questions that we're asking. We've moved, especially in the art space, but in other places as well, moved into more of an exploratory mode. So it's not necessarily always hypothesis testing and those kinds of studies. Sometimes that is what we're doing. But so I think it's just bringing a broader approach. I also have a background and have an edited book that I wrote with Bill Penuel on research practice partnerships. And so just thinking about how research and practice are intertwined can benefit one another, not putting up firewalls, thinking about evidence-based decision making, and also really paying attention to when, the context just means that things have to be done differently than what research might say at that moment is a thing. So bringing maybe that nuance to the conversation is one of the ways I think I'm trying to make a contribution here.
Yeah, I can imagine not too many artists deal well with hypotheses.
No hypotheses at the moment in our arts. That is, but some very interesting work that's going to be coming out later this year on, we supported kind of a look at longitudinal effects of youth arts programs on adults now in their 20s and 30s
Oh,
and
wow.
even older, and sort of these kinds of things that are actually pointing to the possible generation of hypotheses in different areas. So
Right.
it's
Well, that
exciting.
would be fantastic. I look forward to reading that.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully we'll get to talk about the youth development side for a little bit because I know there's been some really great work that came out in the past, I don't know, 9 months or a year.
Yeah.
Um, but before we get to that, I know that the foundation has a real commitment to a specific kind of approach
Uh-huh.
that guides the work that you do with communities, that guides the research. And so, if you could explain a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. We call it our philanthropic strategy. Um, basically, we're a mid-sized foundation. So it's part of an effort to make a greater contribution with the sort of the limited funds that we have. The basic idea is that in each of these three areas where we have these long-term sustained conversations and sets of colleagues out in the field that are that are both organizations doing the work and also professional associations supporting the work that school districts are doing or youth development programs or the arts are doing. We stay in dialogue with them. We also stay in touch with the research and reference research, and essentially through that dialogue and conversation, identify key pressing problems of practice, and from there, essentially identify or invite. And sometimes these are through open calls, and sometimes they're through conversations. Other districts, other organizations that have a shared interest in that problem. So equity-centered leadership is one for now, for an example. we had done a 5-year initiative on building an aligned, comprehensive, what we call principal pipeline, but it's really a system of support from setting standards to aligning prep programs with the school district standards, school district needs, et cetera, through hiring, placement, evaluation, support. The study that was conducted by RAND found that building these principal pipelines were feasible, affordable, and effective. And because there was an effect study, there was a cost study, and the scores the achievement scores in those districts that had built these pipelines changed over 5 years. The thing that didn't change was that gaps persisted that were predicted by sociodemographics. And so we saw that while it's possible to build this pipeline, are we really addressing issues around opportunity equity and opportunity and an achievement and other dimensions? And so that led us to identifying this as an important problem of practice. And as an example, so then we identified 8 districts that are also concerned with this issue. We had an open call for researchers who are doing research in this area who want to sort of collectively as a whole sort of learn together about what does it take to actually, first of all, what is equity-centered leadership? So that's part of the research. But of course, there's a lot of research that points to that, but this is about defining it in collaboration with these 8 school districts, and then also starting to build out these systems of support. So the key here in terms of the strategy that you're asking about, and that's just one example, is that the strategy is really to support innovation, improvement, exploration, and to document it, and with commission research that can document it and analyze it and produce results that others can use in the field. Others can use, they can adapt, they can spur thinking, conceptual thinking, or it can spur, design or other kinds of things. So in that way, our intention is to have a broader impact than our resources alone would allow.
Right. Well, sort of like working at the local in order to impact the global.
Yeah.
I think in a way that I the work kind of ripple out.
Yeah, exactly. And it's absolutely meant, we talk about dual benefits. It's absolutely meant to advance the work of the partners that were, again, organizations or systems or districts. But again, not to, and to document it and document their work in such a way that they have the evidence that they need to sustain whatever improvements or changes that they've made to their work. But yes, exactly. Then from that local to the global.
Right. Yeah, and it's been fascinating to see how these small case studies, like the UPPI or what's happening in the ECPI now, are also sort of inroads into making more systemic changes in other places. And so that's just been really powerful, right? Because we can't do it alone, right? And so
Right.
and I'm happy to say that season 1 talks a lot about the UPPI. So if you haven't heard it yet, listeners, so to talk a little bit more about sort of what makes research impactful and how do you identify it and what the relationship is, I guess, particularly within the foundation between what you're learning from the research and then how you how that shapes your areas future areas for both investment and more research.
Yeah. We have about 50 studies that are active right now of all sort of different areas and sizes and that sort of thing. And, when I say the study we're funding, I always slip into that mode. But they're at various stages. So some of the studies are looking at current initiatives underway, like the ECPI. Some of the studies are gathering kind of data that will inform future initiatives for us. And some of the studies are actually more oriented towards like big infrastructural questions. So we've supported a team of researchers to do a study of the youth out of school time workforce, for example. Who are they, and what have been their pathways, and with the eye towards research-based evidence that can inform policy in a lot of cases, or practice in others. So I mentioned that the earlier the earlier study by Susan Gates and her team of PPI, that really directly informed our next initiative, along with a lot of research by other researchers in the field that had been looking at what equity-centered leadership is and can be and must be. So right now, this initiative is sort of bringing those two bodies of research together. Another example is early on in our, when we started to commission research specifically to kind of understand the nature of the field in terms of informing our next initiative decisions. And again, we always do this in dialogue with the field. So we're bringing in our colleagues and partners to talk with us, to share with us, to give us feedback on what they think about things. And then we, connect that with the research base. We funded Bianca Baldridge, who's a professor at Harvard now. She was at Wisconsin at the time. And her colleagues to look at how youth development organizations that were designed by and for and with communities of color, and specifically for youth from those communities, kind of what the big issues and challenges were for them. And this research has proven really influential for our direction in a couple of areas: youth arts and youth development. For one thing, that study really documented how powerful those programs can be, these sort of like safe emotional havens where there's a lot of learning that can go on, and highlighting the very important role that the youth worker plays, that relationship. I mean, we know relationships are at the center of everything. How that person is a mentor, a coach, a navigator, a guide, all of these things, and from the same community, is often contending with many of the structural factors that the youth are as well. And so, and on top of that, often not paid very well, no benefits, are in a very precarious position as youth workers, playing such an important role. So that really drew our attention to the sort of staffing and work issues in that space. At the same time, Bianca and her team organized or commissioned or ran a YPAR study, a youth participatory action study. And those young people, as sort of a part of their larger study, and those young people, I mean, this sounds so silly to say, but just brought to the table that they wanted to go where they were interested. Like we all know, interest-driven programs are essential, but where they felt welcome and where they kind of found their people. And, maybe their friends were there, or maybe they found the friends there, but the social dimensions of it, especially for older youth who don't have to go, just really came to the fore. And we separately commissioned a study by Erica Halverson, that was looking at different regions and what are their sort of regional, what she ended up calling scenes. So, in sort of Rust Belt, or she looked in the Southwest and in different parts of the country, and just understanding how sort of the history of the community and the space shaped the possibilities for senses of who people were going to meet and what kind of history they had with the place in order to make connections. So anyway, so those are examples of studies that has then, we're in the process of ironing out the details of initiatives. So I don't want to go overboard with what I'm saying, but but it's really guided our thinking about what we need to be focused on and paying attention to. And a lot of these ideas were in the ether, or well, let me put it this way: they're in practice, and they also are in the research and have been for a long time in both. But elevating them in a way that people in a foundation can say, this is something we actually can act on, is a different kind of a thing. So that's
Right.
Those two studies and others. I mean, we commissioned a number.
Right.
Have really helped to shape this.
Yeah, it also kind of strikes me too that part of that strategic lens that you bring to the research is also, I think, part of the strength of that, and what Wallace has been doing and is doing, is sort of also a commitment and longevity. Um, because, for example, I know that at Leadership Space, And in that, the interest around, what is an effective principle and how do you wrap equity into that has been going on for, I'm going to say, at least 15 years.
Yeah.
With the foundation putting resources and time and opportunities for sharing learning for that amount of time. And I don't know how much that is um, sort of specific to Wallace and your approach to work or something, but I think it has definitely created this launching pad for others to continue the work.
Yeah, I think that it's a real strength of this foundation that it has stuck with um, like these long-term commitments to these different areas of inquiry, um, actually it built institutional knowledge. We're just actually in a practice right now, or in a process, I should say, of mapping out kind of the last 25 years plus of research that has been commissioned
Wow.
by Wallace, but also trying to contextualize it in the
Yep.
broader research and evidence base, to identify where are like sort of where are gaps, but where are also like interesting lines of inquiry to push further.
Mm.
And it's happened really in all three. I mean, the other area, in addition to the ECPI, is in the arts. We had our previous long-term. Wallace has done a sort of like 20 years of investment, and largely in building audiences with the idea of um, organizational well-being and health, but oftentimes defined not only but significantly by financial resilience.
Right.
And that's a common challenge to nonprofits, period, and the arts in particular. And it's an important one. But we kind of ended the last initiative, which ended just before COVID hit, by the way. And so we were still in touch with all of the organizations as they had to shutter down and start to kind of say, who am I? What am I doing? Where are my people?
Right.
That led us really that 20-year commitment and kind of where we were led us to rethink, not rethink, but to say, like, focusing on audience building is one thing. And actually the research on that, which was led by Francie Ostrauer from UT Tech Austin, found that organizations were able to build their audiences, but they weren't able to do it in ways that added to their financial health. I mean, at least in a 5-year period, because it usually, on some level, costs more to bring in new audience. You had to either, do new kinds of programming or partnerships, or you had to discount tickets, and more to the point, perhaps, just audience behavior seems to have changed. So where it used to be people would buy subscriptions, that's less common now because people, presumably have more options and are keeping their options open. So anyway, there was a moment, and through the research and the initiative of saying, let's understand organizations that were really founded by and for and with their community, and not like many arts organizations, including ones I've worked with, that were founded by and for and with the discipline of the arts, which is also extremely important, but it just has a different relationship to the community than ones that were really founded for the community and by the community. So that research also then led us to this new 5-year initiative that I described earlier. And that's just another example of this long-term. And we, in fact, met this week to kind of look at what are across, it's $100 million, as is the ECPI. But it's got a combination of funding large organizations and working with them for 5 years. There's some re-granting to smaller organizations and studying re-granting and how that could be made more equitable. And then there's also a program that's called Field Studies that we're taking to sort of proposals from the field about what questions do they have that can advance that part of the arts ecosystem. So there's a whole range of really interesting questions that are coming from the field. And so we just met this week to kind of look at all of the things going on and, sort of what the themes are that are bubbling up as a way to start to think through what comes next in a couple of years.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of a great segue to sort of my next question around, because the question's what's next also hints at what gaps
Yeah.
might have been revealed that we didn't know were there, or new gaps that have emerged because of shifting contexts. And so, I guess from your perspective, what do you think are some of those, or the next set of important questions that can move our understanding of school leadership, educational leadership, community building, and strengthening forward?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things Wallace does pretty much across the board, certainly in ed leadership and in youth development, is really think about like the system level of things. I mean, in part, the arts ecosystem is just a little more complicated than there aren't oftentimes like school districts or
Right.
after school out networks or um, and so we think about what kind of levers for change exist in the system. And one of the things we've been observing, first of all, in ACPI to some degree, and also in other places, is we had funded a number of years ago, or like 3 years ago, Learning Policy Institute, Linda Darling-Hammond and Marjorie Wechsler and their colleagues produced a study report looking at professional preparation and learning, and, finding that there's just not a lot on professional development for sitting principals, and their report surfaced a number of questions about that, and we're seeing that play out. Obviously,
Mm.
there's a lot of support in the induction years, but what kinds of supports are important when in a career? What kind of context? Those kinds of things are questions we're thinking about. We're really struck by the current, last few years conversation about chronic absenteeism,
Mm.
which everybody's talking about, teacher burnout slash turnover slash fiscal cliff slash dropping enrollments, and that the leader is not really a part of that conversation. I mean, leaders are, the
Right.
people who are doing the leading are, but the conversation at the is often, in isolation from
Mm.
the really critical role that leaders play in creating the conditions of, attracting and retaining teachers, paying attention to them to avoid burnout, and also, of course, connecting with families and, creating that connection so that to address both, so teachers being supportive of young people so that they want to come to school, and
Right.
the relationship with the family. So anyway, that's a big, I think, thing we're interested in right now. Is there a way to begin to think more systemically about these kinds of things? And there's these, as there's different researchers are in different departments studying these things, and professional associations have different constituencies, and it's just a very disjointed system. So it's just something we're talking about here.
Right.
We're also thinking about, how the youth development sector, which we put so much time into over the years, along with other funders, how can it be leveraged to really add value to existing ongoing sort of citywide efforts to make change for young people? So a lot of times there are these cross-sector partnerships out there, but the youth development sector just has not been invited to the table. They're just not
Mm.
there, even though, we know that kids spend 80 to 90% of the time out of school when you count sleeping and summer and vacations and that sort of thing, and how important that time can be, and for expanding horizons and deepening skills. So again, that's sort of a systems level question of, and this also arises from, we just funded, and it's coming to a close fairly soon, 30 different cross-sector partnerships from around the country
Mm.
that are doing different things around, college career readiness, around economic mobility. It's around civic revitalization, but with a youth component, to think through all the, incredible assets that they may have to support young people outside of the school. And districts are, almost always at the table. Anyway, so that's another kind of gap that we're thinking about. And I guess the last thing I'd say is that, we really look to our colleagues in research who are working with us as partners on the different studies, and the researchers whose work we read, and, we try to stay abreast of the work in these different areas, to them to really try to understand what are the questions that, that not only are important, because there's always a
Right.
million important questions, but like where a foundation like we are with the kind of strategy I described earlier, like where we could actually you know, it move the needle in terms of insights for the field, working in partnership with the field. So
Mm.
keep our ear to the ground.
Yeah, and I think that's always been something I've appreciated, and I've seen, change over the years is the importance of having, well, at least within the Wallace, ecosystem, to use your language, of having people from the arts, youth development, and ed leadership in conversation with each other.
Yeah.
I think that's really important because I think, the idea of, in schools we talk about learning, but do we talk about youth development? Or do we talk about arts as a vehicle for youth development and voice and all of that? And so for me, it's been really um, challenging in good ways to be, listening in on those conversations and
Hmm.
seeing what you do um, to begin to create bridges, between those or among those different spaces and places and people, as a way to, again, to sort of think about systems in an even a more broader way.
Yeah.
So it's been those conversations have been a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot in the past couple of years from
Yeah.
them. So,
It's great. Yeah.
um, I think it's just like also evidence of what you're talking about, right? That it's not just out there, but also has to be sort of, in here as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would love to talk to you more, and I hope to have you back because I think the youth development piece and the work that has come out recently is really, it's been fascinating. And I definitely want to have conversations around that leading up to next summer to make sure that, we're helping educational leaders and faculty get ready for that. But it's been great talking to you, Bronwyn. Thank you so much for your time. And if you just move your camera a little bit, we can see the Statue of Liberty.
Oh, yeah. No, it's right here. It's right here.
But thanks.
A lot of boats going by, but the statue.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Well, again, thanks so much. It was great talking to you.
Okay. Great to talk to you. Thanks, Mom.